The worst pain of my life was not the contraction that bent me in half so hard I thought my spine would crack. It was hearing my husband say, in a calm, irritated voice just outside the hospital curtain, "I'm coming, Mum. Stop crying. Dad needs me there. Sophie has doctors. Women do this every day." I was 38 weeks pregnant, barefoot on a hospital floor, gone cold under my shaking feet. One hand gripping the bed rail and the other pressed under the weight of my stomach, while another contraction climbed through me like fire. I could hear every word. I could hear his mother sniffing dramatically through the phone speaker. I could hear his impatience. I could hear the rustle of his jacket as he straightened it, already half gone before he even came back inside. When Ethan pulled the curtain aside, he was wearing the face he used whenever he had already made a decision and wanted me to mistake it for concern. His hair was perfect. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest stress. Anybody else would have thought he was a worried husband caught between two emergencies. I knew better. I knew that expression. It was the same expression he wore when his mother insulted me at dinner and he later told me not to be sensitive. The same one he wore when his father spoke over me, dismissed my opinions, mocked my work, and Ethan said, "You know how he is." I could barely breathe. "Don't leave me." He came closer, but only close enough to look generous. My father collapsed at the charity gala. "My mother is hysterical. I need to go calm things down." Another contraction ripped through me so hard my knees buckled. A nurse caught my elbow and helped me back onto the bed. I looked at Ethan through tears. I hadn't meant to let him see. "I'm in labor, I know. Your son is coming." He glanced at the nurse, embarrassed, as if I had raised my voice in church. "Sophie, please, don't do this." "Do what?" I gasped. "Ask my husband to stay while I give birth." His jaw tightened. Then he said the sentence I would hear in my nightmares for months afterward. "They're my parents." I stared at him, as if that explained everything, as if I was something else, as if the child pushing his way into this world from inside my body somehow belonged to a lower category of loyalty than the people who had spent years treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own marriage. "I am your family," I whispered. He looked away first. "Not like this. Not tonight." Then he left. He left while I was 5 centimeters dilated and terrified. He left while my blood pressure was climbing and the baby's heart rate was dropping. He left while a nurse with kind eyes named Marisol held my hand because my husband wouldn't. He left while the doctor rushed in and said they needed to move now, not later, because my son was in distress. He left while they wheeled me beneath white lights so bright they erased the edges of the room. He left while I signed surgical consent forms with a shaking hand and no familiar face beside me. He left while my body was cut open to save our child. And the cruelest part was that for a little while, even then, I kept defending him in my head. Maybe his father really was dying. Maybe his mother had panicked. Maybe he would come running back before the surgery started. Maybe I still mattered more than I had been trained to believe. Then I woke up after the emergency C-section with a raw throat, a body that felt broken apart and stitched together by strangers, and an empty chair beside my hospital bed. My son was in the nursery for observation. My husband was nowhere in the room, but his face was on my phone. AA. Local society page had posted photographs from the Mercer Foundation gala. There was Ethan, one arm around his mother, one hand on a champagne glass, standing beside his father under a chandelier while I was on an operating table. His father looked healthy. His mother looked radiant. Ethan looked polished, composed, and very present. The caption said, "The Mercer family had led the evening's downer. Announcements with grace and unity." Grace and unity. I stared at that photograph until the pixels blurred. Then I turned my face into the pillow and cried so hard I felt my stitches throb. That was the night my marriage ended. Not in court. Not in a dramatic argument. Not when lawyers got involved months later or when his mother finally said something so monstrous even he couldn't excuse it. It ended in that hospital room, under fluorescent lights, while my body still trembled from surgery and my son slept in another ward. The woman who checked into St. Catherine's Hospital as Ethan, Mercer's wife, never came home after the hospital. To understand why I meant that with every piece of my soul, you have to understand how a woman can be loved loudly in public, diminished quietly in private, and abandoned at the exact moment she finally realizes she has been asking the wrong people to choose her. When I met Ethan Mercer, I was 29 and stupid in the way women are only stupid when they are actually hopeful. I had built a small but growing career designing interiors for boutique hotels and private residences. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of myself. I paid my bills on time, I took my mother to dinner once a week. I had an apartment full of secondhand furniture I'd refinished by hand, and every corner of it felt like proof that a soft life could still be self-made. Ethan walked into my world looking like the answer to a prayer. I had been too embarrassed to say out loud. He was handsome in the effortless, expensive way men from old money often are not. Flashy, never loud. He wore his privilege like it was natural, invisible, almost innocent. He noticed details, he remembered things I said. He looked at me the way women in novels get looked at right before they ruin their lives. We met at a hotel project where my firm had been hired to redesign a historic property. Ethan was there because his family's development company had financed part of the renovation. He asked smart questions about lighting, textures, space. He treated my work like it mattered. He asked me out 3 times before I said yes, and when I finally did, he brought me to a tiny restaurant with no cameras, no business associates, no family friends, and listened so carefully I mistook observation for devotion. For the first 6 months he was almost painfully attentive. He sent lunch to my office when I had deadlines. He learned how I liked my coffee. He called my mother Mrs. Bennett with such gentle respect that she later told me, "If he keeps this up, I'll start believing in miracles." There were signs, of course. There are always signs. The first time I met Diane Mercer, she hugged me without warmth and said, "You're prettier than Ethan described. That must be useful in your industry." Useful, I laughed, because I didn't yet understand that women like Diane insult you in language delicate enough to make your hurt look impolite. Victor Mercer shook my hand, looked at my dress, my shoes, the bag I had saved 3 months to buy, and asked Ethan in front of me, "She's not in politics, is she? You know how disastrous ambition can be in a wife." Ethan squeezed my knee under the table and changed the subject. In the car afterward, I waited for him to say something. Anything. Daddy's father was rude. Daddy's mother was impossible. That I deserved better. Instead, he smiled wearily and said, "Congratulations. They were behaved and I should have turned the car around right then. But that's the thing about red flags when they arrive wrapped in charm. You don't call them what they are. You call them quirks, you call them stress. You call them family dynamics. You'll call them things you can survive." Ethan made it easy to survive them in the beginning, because he always came afterward with tenderness. He would brush my hair from my face and say, "Don't let them get to you." He would kiss my forehead and whisper, "You're the best thing in my life." He would hold me until I forgot that comfort after cruelty is still part of cruelty. By the time we got engaged, I had already learned the rhythm of his loyalties, even if I refused to name it. His parents came first in every major decision, not because he loved them more, which would have been easier to understand, but because pleasing them was the spine of his identity. Ethan did not know how to exist outside their approval. He wore independence like a tailored suit, but underneath it, he was still a son performing for the front row. When we announced the engagement, Diane smiled for the cameras and said to a table full of guests, "Well, at least she has decent posture. That photographs beautifully." People laughed. I laughed too. That's one of the memories that shames me most now. Not because I should have fought her at my own engagement party, but because I had already begun doing that thing women do when love asks them to betray themselves in tiny installments. I translated disrespect into harmlessness, because the truth would have cost too much. My mother saw it before I did, on the night Ethan proposed, after he dropped me home and I stood in my kitchen staring at the ring like it might answer questions I wasn't brave enough to ask. My mother came over with a bottle of wine and took one look at my face. "You love him," she said. "I do. You trust him," I answered too quickly. Yes, she sat down slowly. That wasn't the question. I remember laughing because I wanted her to stop looking at me like that. "Mum, you always assume the worst." "No," she said quietly. "I assume patterns continue until someone breaks them." I should have listened to her more often. The wedding was beautiful in the way expensive sadness often is. White roses, candlelight, string quartet, a vineyard his family partly owned. Ethan looked at me at the altar like I was something miraculous, and for 1 full hour I believed I had outrun every warning. Then at the reception, his mother tapped a spoon against her crystal glass and stood to give a toast. She looked elegant, in ice blue silk, smiling the smile of a woman who knows a room will forgive almost anything if she says it beautifully enough. "To Sophie," she said, "who has brought freshness, creativity, and such modern energy into our family. Ethan has always had a soft heart for strays." The room went still. Then a few people laughed because rich people are cowards when cruelty is dressed as wit. Ethan stood up, touched his mother's shoulder, and said, "All right, Mum," in that light, almost playful tone people use when they don't intend to stop anything. He did not take the microphone. He did not say, "Don't speak about my wife," like that. He did not walk out with me when I excused myself to the bathroom and cried so hard I nearly threw up. Later that night, he found me on the balcony and said, "She was joking." I said, "About me being a stray." He sighed, already tired of my pain. She uses humor when she's uncomfortable. I remember staring at him, the city lights shimmering beyond the vineyard, my wedding dress too tight around my ribs, and realizing something I still wasn't ready to fully understand. A person doesn't have to hit you to teach you that your hurt is inconvenient. The first year of our marriage passed in a haze of polished surf. Ethan bought us a beautiful house in an old neighborhood lined with trees and stone steps and brass knockers on glossy black doors. He called it our beginning. He handed me keys on a velvet ribbon and said, "Now you'll finally have a place worthy of you." I believed him. I put myself into that house. I chose every lamp, every curtain, every dish towel, every shade of paint. I planted ivies in the kitchen window and fig ivy in the courtyard. I softened hard corners. I made it warm. I made it breathe. I made it feel like home. What I did not know then, what I would only learn much later, was that nearly everything about my life with Ethan had been arranged to keep me grateful, not equal. The house was in a trust structure I had never been shown. My access to some joint financial accounts was more limited than he implied. Business dinners that were supposedly optional were, in his family's mind, evaluations. Every Christmas, birthday, anniversary, and holiday came with an invisible scorecard I wasn't allowed to see, but was somehow always failing. If dinner wasn't served at exactly the right time, Diane noticed. If I spoke too confidently about my work, Victor called me ambitious, like it was a warning. If I declined another glass of wine, someone asked if I was pregnant in a tone that made my body feel like public property. Ethan always smoothed things over. Never for me, always around me. He was the kind of man who could watch you drown and throw compliments instead of a rope. Then I got pregnant, and everything sharpened. We had been trying for almost a year, quietly, not because I wanted secrecy, but because I had learned that Mercers treated information like currency and weakness like entertainment. When the test finally turned positive, I sat on the bathroom floor with it in my hands and laughed and cried at the same time. Ethan came in, saw my face, saw the stick, and for a second he looked genuinely stunned. Then he grinned and swept me off the floor and kissed me like he had loved me right all along. That first month, he was wonderful. He downloaded baby apps. He came to doctor appointments. He read about prenatal vitamins and maternity pillows. He pressed his ear to my stomach long before there was anything to hear and told me we were going to be the kind of parents who made our kid feel safe. I wanted so badly to believe that fatherhood would mature him into the husband I kept waiting for. Instead, it made his parents feel entitled to me in ways I had never experienced before. Diane started dropping by unannounced, carrying soup I hadn't asked for, criticism I definitely hadn't asked for, and opinions about everything from my shoes to my sleeping position. "You shouldn't still be working this much," she'd say, walking through my kitchen like an inspector. "Stress affects the baby." "I'm fine," I'd tell her. She'd smile thinly. First-time mothers always think that. Victor was worse because his cruelty came disguised as practical concern. At 16 weeks, he leaned back in his chair during Sunday dinner, looked at my barely visible bump, and said, "Let's hope the child gets Ethan's steadiness." Temperament often skips a generation. I put my fork down. "I didn't realize you thought I was unstable." He shrugged. "I think sensitivity is exhausting." Ethan chuckled under his breath and squeezed my knee under the table like I should take that as intimacy. When we got into the car, I said, "Why do you never say anything?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because everything turns into a fight with you when it involves them." That sentence lived in my chest for a long time. Not because it was clever, because it was efficient. In one breath, he made their cruelty my reaction to it. He made me the storm and them the weather. By the time I was 6 months pregnant, the baby had become the family's favorite weapon. Diane referred to him as our heir even before we knew the sex. Victor started sending Ethan articles about legacy planning, private schools, bloodlines, family representation. At a dinner party, one of Diane's friends asked if I planned to hire a nanny. Before I could answer, Diane laughed and said, well, Sophie wasn't raised with certain standards, but she adapt. The table went silent. I looked at Ethan. He took a sip of wine. Later, in the bathroom upstairs, I leaned over the sink and stared at my own face until I barely recognized it. My cheeks looked fuller from pregnancy. My eyes looked older. My mouth had learned a shape I hated. That tight little line women get when they are swallowing words for survival that night. For the first time, I called my mother crying. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, come stay with me. I'm married. Yes, she said. I know. It wasn't judgment. It was grief. I didn't go. I stayed because Ethan came home early the next evening with peonies, Thai food from my favorite restaurant, and the kind of apology that sounds sincere if you ignore that it changes nothing. I'm trying, Sophie, he said, kneeling in front of me with his hand over my stomach. I'm under pressure from all sides. What about me? I asked. He smiled sadly, like I was proving something unfortunate. That's exactly what I mean. The baby shower should have been the moment I walked away. My friends wanted something small and warm. My mother wanted to host it in her backyard with homemade food and yellow roses and old blankets folded over chairs. Diane insisted the Mercer family could not possibly have the mother of their grandchild celebrating like a church raffle, so the event was moved to a private room in a country club that still smelled faintly of old money and disapproval. Everything about it felt wrong from the start. The flowers were too formal. The guest list included women I barely knew but Diane approved of. My closest friends looked out of place. My mother sat near the back of the room, shoulders too straight, watching everything with a strained silence, of someone trying not to humiliate me. By reacting honestly, Diane gave a speech while dessert was being served. Of course she did. She held up a polished silver rattle engraved with the Mercer crest and said, I know Sophie's side isn't bringing much in the way of family pieces, so I thought our grandson should start with something that reflects where he comes from. My mother froze. I went cold all over. Someone at the table near the windows made a shocked little noise. Another woman quickly pretended to cough. A few of Diane's friends gave the tight smiles of women relieved not to be the target. I looked at Ethan. He smiled, then leaned toward me and whispered, don't make a scene. It felt like being slapped in church. My mother stood up before I could. She lifted her purse, looked at me with tears she was too proud to let fall, and said, I'm going outside for air. I wanted to follow her. I wanted to stand up and flip the table and tell every woman in that room to choke on the petit fours. Instead, I sat there with my hands in my lap because my son kicked beneath my ribs and fear had already taught me stillness. The party ended. Ethan was annoyed with me. With me, he closed the car door harder than necessary and said, you embarrassed my mother by sulking. I turned to him so slowly, my neck hurt. She insulted my family. He exhaled like a burdened saint. She made an awkward joke. No, she humiliated my mother in public. He rubbed his forehead. Can you not do this today? That was the first day I thought, very clearly, I may not be safe in this marriage. Not physically. Ethan had never laid a hand on me in anger. But there are other ways to become unsafe. Around someone. When your reality is always negotiable to them. When your pain becomes a problem to manage. When the people who hurt you know they can do it openly because the person beside you has already decided silence is easier than loyalty. Around 7 months, Ethan suggested I stop working early, at least until the baby is a few months old. He said. I told him I wanted to keep taking clients from home as long as I could. He said he worried about stress. I said work made me feel like myself. He said, you don't need to prove anything. That's another sentence men use when they're trying to make your independence sound like vanity. The next week he had his accountant help restructure our household spending, and suddenly a lot of the accounts I used required approval or transfers or conversations. He acted like it was temporary, practical, responsible. He said babies were expensive. He said he wanted everything organized. I said I could manage my own finances. He kissed my tempo and answered, I know, but let me take care of you. Women are taught to hear love in that sentence. I hear the lock in it now. My world got smaller in careful ways. Fewer clients, fewer outings, more family dinners, more rest, more checking in, more reminders that my body no longer belonged entirely to me and my life no longer moved according to my judgment. At night, lying beside Ethan while my son rolled under my skin, I would place his hand on my stomach and tell myself this child would change everything. That once Ethan held him, Something buried under years of obedience would crack open and let a better man out. Pregnancy makes profits of desperate women. Then came the night my water broke. It was raining, the hard summer kind that makes the streets shine black and gold. I was standing in the nursery folding tiny white onesies, trying not to think about the argument Ethan and I had had that morning over his mother wanting a key to our house for when the baby comes. I felt a sudden pressure low in my body, then warmth running down my legs. For one stunned second, I just stood there looking at the damp floorboards beneath me. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, because I was scared and thrilled and all the air in the room seemed to change at once. I called for Ethan. He came upstairs, saw my face, saw the floor, and everything in him lit up. He moved fast, grabbed the hospital bag, helped me into the car, kissed my knuckles at every red light. He looked almost boyish with excitement. I remember watching the city smear pass through rain-streaked windows and thinking maybe this was it. Maybe every awful thing behind us was just prelude. Maybe we would look back on all of it once our son was here and laugh at how dramatic life had seemed before it became real. At the hospital, the contractions began coming hard and regular. Ethan texted updates to his parents before we had even checked in. I didn't love that, but I was too busy breathing through pain to care. Around midnight, after hours of labor, I was exhausted and shaking. My doctor said I was progressing, but the baby's position was a little concerning. We might need intervention if things stalled. Ethan stepped out to take a call from his mother. I heard his voice shift almost immediately from husband to son. What happened then? Is he conscious? Then, after a long pause, all right, I'm coming. He pulled the curtain back and told me his father had collapsed at the Mercer Foundation gala downtown. Diane was frantic. He needed to go. I remember the exact taste in my mouth, metal and disbelief. No, it's serious. I need you. He looked conflicted for all of 3 seconds. There are nurses. The doctor is here. I'll be back as soon as I can. I held his wrist with surprising strength for a woman. In labor, she's don't do this. His face hardened, not cruelly, which would have been easier to fight, just with that polished coldness of a man protecting his own son. Sophie, you are not the only person in crisis tonight. Then he left, and everything that happened after that felt like punishment for trusting him. Within 40 minutes, the baby's heart rate dropped again. My contractions became erratic. A resident I had never met before spoke in a careful, calm voice about fetal distress and emergency surgery. Marisol, the nurse who had been with me most of the night, squeezed my hand and said, "Look at me. Stay with me. We're going to take care of you and your baby." I kept asking if Ethan had called back. No. I kept asking if someone had reached him. No answer. I signed papers I could barely read. I remember being wheeled down a hallway and staring at the ceiling tiles rushing over me like squares of white water. I remember praying with a kind of focus only terror can create. Not please save my marriage. Not please let him come back. Just let my baby live. Let my baby live. Let my baby live. He did. Our son came into the world angry and beautiful and red-faced and perfect. I heard one fierce cry before they rushed him to observation because of the distress. I remember crying with relief while tears ran into my ears. I remember a doctor saying, "You did great," though it felt like surviving a fire more than doing anything well. Then there was too much blood, then more voices, then pressure in my abdomen, and a nurse telling me to stay awake. Then nothing went. I came back to myself hours later. The room was grey with dawn and my body did not feel like mine. Every breath hurt. My lips were dry. My stomach felt hollow and brutalized. Marisol was there. She smiled when she saw my eyes open. "You scared us?" she said gently. "But your little boy is okay, Ethan." The way her face changed told me everything before she answered. "He hasn't returned yet." She brought me my son later. That morning, Leo, we named him Leo because Ethan had chosen it months earlier, saying he wanted a name that sounded strong. The cruelty of that almost made me laugh when Marisol laid him in my arms. He was tiny and warm and impossibly real, with a wrinkled forehead and dark hair plastered in soft, damp swirls. The instant I looked at him, the whole room reorganized around a truth more solid than marriage. I was somebody's mother now, and because of that, I could never again afford to lie to myself about what love looked like. Ethan arrived close to noon. He carried coffee. He came in carefully. The way people enter rooms where they expect justified anger, but hope to soothe it with performance. His tie was different. His hair smelled faintly of expensive cologne, not hospital panic. He kissed my forehead and said, How are you? How's he doing? I looked at him, then at the coffee in his hand, then back at him. Where were you? My father don't. He blinked. Soph, I saw the photographs. He went still. There it was. Not remorse. Calculation. I stopped at the gala because my mother was falling apart, he said. Dad was checked by the medic team. It turned out to be it was complicated. I laughed once, and it sounded terrible in that room. I was in surgery and didn't know it would turn into surgery. You knew I was in labor. He ran a hand through his hair. Everything happened at once? No, I said quietly. You happened all at once. You made a choice. He looked toward the bassinet where Leo slept. Can we not do this right now? And that was it. The final fracture. Not because he was asking for peace for the baby. Because even now, even in that room, even after everything, what he wanted most was control over timing, over tone, over when my pain would be allowed to speak. I looked at my son. I looked at the 4 in my arm and the bruises on my skin and the place in the room where his chair had sat empty all night. Then I said, "Don't tell your mother I've been discharged." Frowned. What? I'm not coming home with you. For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan looked truly shocked. The next 48 hours felt like waking up inside a life I should have left sooner. Ethan alternated between apology and irritation. He said he had panicked. He said his mother had manipulated him. He said I was being dramatic because of hormones and trauma and exhaustion. He said we should not make permanent decisions in an emotional state. He said no one would understand if I turned our son's birth into a family scandal. He said a lot of things men say when they are used to their version of events becoming the official one. What he did not say was, I chose wrong, and I accept the consequences. Diane called the hospital 12 times in one day. Victor sent flowers with a note that read, "Families survive difficult misunderstandings through dignity. Dignity. My mother arrived and took one look at my face before saying, You're done, aren't you? I nodded. She kissed my hair and cried quietly where Ethan couldn't see. Marisol put me in touch with a hospital social worker who helped arrange a private discharge plan because by then I had admitted something out loud I had been avoiding for months. I did not feel emotionally safe going back to that house with Ethan and his parents circling like vultures over the first days of my motherhood. Tessa Reed, my oldest friend from college and now family lawyer with a kind of mind that could cut diamonds, came straight from court in flats and a wrinkled blouse, looked at my chart, looked at Ethan pacing the hallway, and said to me in a low voice, I need you to answer one question, honestly. If you go back with him, will they try to control access to the baby? I thought of Diane demanding a house key. I thought of Victor calling Leo the Mercer heir before he was born. I thought of Ethan telling me not to make scenes while his mother stripped pieces off my dignity in public. Yes, I said. Tessa's face hardened. Then you don't go back. So I didn't. I left the hospital through a side exit with stitches in my abdomen, milk coming in painfully, a diaper bag over one shoulder, my son against my chest, and my whole marriage behind me like a building. On fire. Ethan came to the room 10 minutes after we had gone. I heard later from Marisol that he stood in the doorway staring at the empty bed, the flowers, the missing bassinet, and asked, where did she go? Marisol told him, to somewhere. She feels safe. I wish I had seen his face then. For the first week, I stayed in a furnished recovery apartment Tessa arranged through a client who owed her a favor. It was small, discreet, clean, and blessedly silent. My mother slept on the couch. I shuffled from bed to bathroom like a ghost of myself, learning how to feed Leo through cracked nipples and tears, learning how to sleep in 90-minute pieces, learning that heartbreak after childbirth sits differently in the body because there is no part of you that isn't already open. Ethan called constantly. When I didn't answer, he texted. When I didn't respond, Diane texted. When I blocked her, Victor emailed. Then came the messages from numbers I didn't know. Family, friends, concerned acquaintances, women from the gala circuit asking if I was alright because Diane was worried. About me. Worried. That word followed me like poison perfume. On the 6th day after Leo's birth, Ethan showed up outside the apartment building. I saw him, through the window first, standing on the sidewalk with roses in his hands like a man auditioning for forgiveness. My mother was heating soup. Tessa was at the table reviewing paperwork. Leo was asleep on my chest. For one dangerous second my body reacted. Before my mind, relief, recognition, longing, the old training. Tessa saw my face, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain closed. No, I just wanted to see the Baby, he can see the baby when there's an agreement in place. He's his father, and you're recovering from surgery after your husband abandoned you in labor and lied about why. You don't owe him access on demand because he brought flowers. The intercom buzzed. Then again. Finally Tessa answered it herself. Go home, Ethan. I need to talk to my wife. No, Tessa said. You need a lawyer. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Then Ethan said, sharp and cold, what has she told you? Tessa smiled without warmth. Enough. She cut the line. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead I went into the bathroom, shut the door, sat on the floor with my hand over my mouth, and cried into a towel so I wouldn't wake the baby. Because that is another thing no one tells women about leaving. Even when you are right, even when you are saving yourself, grief does not politely step aside for clarity. You still mourn the version of love you built your life around. You still ache for the person you kept hoping would exist if you just held on long enough. On the 9th day, postpartum, the first real bomb landed. Paige Collins, Ethan's executive assistant, emailed Tessa's office asking for a confidential meeting. I knew Paige only in passing. She was efficient, polished, impossible to read. She had worked for Ethan for 3 years and always seemed loyal in the quiet, competent way assistants and powerful officers learn to be. She came to Tessa's office after hours wearing a plain black coat and no makeup. She looked like she hadn't slept. I shouldn't be here, she said. Tessa replied, then why are you? Paige looked at me, really looked at me, at the exhaustion under my eyes, at Leo asleep in his car seat by the desk, at the healing bruise near the foresight on my hand. Then she said something that changed the entire case. Victor Mercer never collapsed. The room seemed to tilt. What? Paige swallowed. He had chest tightness earlier in the evening. The medic checked him. It was indigestion and anxiety. He refused transport. Diane called Ethan anyway and told him his father was going down, that the investors were there, that he needed to be seen supporting the family. By the time Ethan left the hospital, he already knew Victor wasn't dying. I heard blood rushing in my ears. Tessa leaned forward. How do you know? Because I was there. I was managing donor communications. I also have the calendar revisions, internal messages, and the call log. She slid a flash drive across the desk. And because after the gala, Victor and Diane were joking in the side lounge about how Sophie would finally learn where she stood. My stomach turned so violently I thought I might be sick. Paige's eyes flicked to Leo. My sister died 3 years ago after a postpartum hemorrhage. Her husband wasn't there either. Different reason, same arrogance. I listened to them talk about you like you were an inconvenience, and I couldn't stay quiet. Tessa plugged in the drive. What we found inside was worse than even my darkest suspicions. Texts from Diane to Ethan saying, if you don't show, people will talk. She'll still be in labor. First babies take forever. A response from Ethan. I'll come for an hour, then go back. A message from Victor. Good. We need optics. Tonight, donors are nervous. A message from Diane after Ethan arrived. See, your wife will survive one night without being the center of the universe. And then, the one that nearly hollowed me out, Ethan's reply. Just keep this from turning into another emotional circus. I'll handle Sophie after. I stared at that sentence. Until the screen blurred, and handle Sophie after. As if I were fallout. As if my labor were drama. As if our son's birth were an event to manage around donor anxiety and maternal theatrics. There were more. Emails scheduling a meeting with the family. Attorney 2 days after Leo's expected due date to discuss post-birth financial stabilization and domestic expectations. Draft language for a revised post-nuptial agreement that would have significantly limited my access to marital assets in the event of emotional instability, public reputational harm, or relocation with the minor child. And actual notes, Victor's comments in the margin. She'll sign anything once the baby is here if Ethan keeps her dependent. I could not breathe for a moment. All those months of let me take care of you. All those tiny financial restrictions. All those remarks about sensitivity, stress, hormones. They had not simply been cruel. They had been strategic. I think something in me died in that office. Not hope. That was already gone. Something softer. Something that had still wanted there to be misunderstanding. Not design. I went home that night to the apartment and sat up in bed holding Leo against my chest while the city was side glowed indifferent and enormous. My son made little sighing sounds in his sleep. His fingers flexed against my skin, I looked at his face and understood with absolute certainty that I would never let that family teach him what love was supposed to cost. The second twist came less than a week later, and it was the kind of revelation that makes you reassemble your whole past with different hands. A woman named Judith Val requested a meeting. The surname meant something to me immediately, though I had not heard it spoken aloud in years. Val was my maternal grandmother's family name. My grandmother, Evelyn, had died when I was to the outside world. She had been a private donor, an investor, one of those quietly powerful women whose names rarely made headlines because they preferred leverage to attention. To me, she had been perfume and velvet gloves, an impossible standard softened by secret tenderness. She was the only wealthy person in my childhood who ever made money seem like a responsibility, instead of a costume. She and my mother had been estranged for years over choices that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with pride. I loved her anyway. She loved me in a way that felt both fierce and organized. When she died, I was told there were trusts in place. Long-term protections, structures that would be explained at the appropriate time. I was grieving, overwhelmed, and frankly eager to live a life that did not depend on inherited power. So I signed papers when asked, listened when needed, and then stepped away from most of it. Some modest distributions supported my education years earlier, but I had never leaned on family wealth to build my adult life. I wanted to know who I was without it. Judith arrived at the apartment in a navy suit and spoke with the serene precision of someone used to handling life-altering information without dramatics. Your grandmother established a conditional family trust, she told me. You became primary beneficiary at 30, but full controlling authority over its largest holdings was delayed until the birth of your first living child. I just stared at her. My mother, sitting beside me, whispered, she never told me. That. Judith nodded. She believed motherhood would be the moment Ms. Bennet would stop choosing people who asked her to shrink. I laughed then, once, because grief and irony often wear the same mask. What holdings? I asked. Judith folded her hands. Among other things, controlling interest in Vale Capital's domestic real estate arm, several properties held through layered trusts, and senior secured debt positions connected to Mercer Urban Development. The room went completely still. I said, very slowly, Mercer, yes. Tessa, who had joined us for the meeting, leaned forward. How connected? Judith looked at me, significantly. What followed felt less like a conversation and more like someone lifting a wall I had spent years standing in front of without knowing what was behind it. The house Ethan had called our beginning, held through an entity controlled by the trust. The Mercers had never outright owned it. Victor had arranged a discreet occupancy and financing structure years earlier. During a liquidity squeeze, choosing secrecy to protect the family image, Diane loved to refer to it as the Mercer House. But on paper, in the cold, honest language of contracts, it was not theirs. There were also debt instruments, old ones, powerful ones. Evelyn Vale had invested in Victor's expansion year before under strict terms, then rolled that influence through entities designed to protect me without advertising the connection. She had never trusted the Mercer family. She had watched Ethan court me and, apparently, prepared contingencies in case charm turned into control. I sat there with my son in my arms and felt something I had not felt in months. Not triumph, alignment, for the first time since leaving the hospital. The ground beneath me felt real. Tessa's eyes sharpened in that dangerous way they did when justice finally had teeth. Can they be caught? Judith answered. Under certain breach conditions, yes. Such as fraud, coercive financial, manipulation, material, reputational misuse. Judith gave the smallest hint of a smile. Potentially. My mother covered her mouth with one hand and looked at me as if she were seeing my grandmother's face over my shoulder. I remember asking the only question that mattered in that moment. Can they take my baby? Tessa answered before anyone else. Not if I can help it. So we went to war. Ethan's first formal move came faster than I expected. He filed an emergency petition claiming I had wrongfully relocated our son without notice, while in a vulnerable postpartum condition, and that he feared outside influences were destabilizing me. Outside influences? That was how his lawyers referred to my mother and my oldest friend. I was furious, and I was terrified. Because even when you know the truth, there is something uniquely horrifying about seeing your life translated into legal language by people who profit from distortion. They painted me as impulsive, emotionally overwhelmed, influenced by a hostile social circle, and at risk of alienating a willing father. Ethan submitted photographs of the nursery I had designed, messages where I had once told him he'd be a good dad, and excerpts from texts sent during pregnancy when I had apologized after arguments just to keep the peace. Abuse leaves paperwork too. That is one of its ugliest efficiencies. But by then we had far more than grief and instinct. We had hospital records showing I underwent emergency surgery and experienced significant blood loss while my husband was unreachable for critical portions of care. We had photographs from the gala time-stamped. While I was in the operating room, we had pages evidence. We had who agreed to provide a statement about my condition, Ethan's absence, and the hospital's difficulty contacting him. And we had something else now. Something Ethan did not know. Power he had spent years teaching me to underestimate in myself. The first confrontation happened outside Leo's pediatric appointment. Tessa had insisted on security and careful scheduling, but Ethan managed to catch me near the underground parking entrance before the driver could pull the car around. I was 6 weeks postpartum, still moving carefully, still sleeping like a soldier. In fragments, Leo was strapped against my chest in a carrier, warm and heavy and oblivious. Ethan stepped out from behind a concrete pillar and said my name in the voice he used when he wanted the past to feel close enough to undo. Sophie. My whole body stiffened. He looked thinner, less polished. There were shadows under his eyes I had never seen before. For a dangerous second, he looked like a man in pain, and my old reflex to soften rose up so automatically I hated myself for it. Then I remembered the operating table. What are you doing here? I've been trying to talk to you. You've been trying to get around my lawyer. He looked at Leo, and something in his face twisted. I miss my son. I adjusted the carrier protectively. His expression hardened. You took him. I took myself and my newborn somewhere safe after you abandoned us. I did not abandon you. You left me in active labor to attend a gala. It was my father. No, I said, stepping closer despite the tremor in my legs. It was your image. It was your need to keep kneeling at the same altar that has been feeding off us since the day I met them. He ran a hand over his face. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I almost laughed. And you don't understand that. Pressure stops mattering as an excuse when someone is bleeding open without you. He looked stricken then. Truly stricken. That landed. I saw it. For 1 second I thought maybe remorse would finally make him honest. Instead he lowered his voice and said, it was such a perfect Ethan sentence. Not you were right. No, I'm sorry. Not, how do I repair this? You destroy everything as if the destruction had not already happened. And not by me. I met his eyes. Everything you're talking about was built on me swallowing it. That's over. Because women like her are too well trained to slander without a layer of deniability. Instead she began making sad public appearances. Telling people she was heartbroken that family conflict had overshadowed the joy of her first grandchild. She spoke admiringly of Ethan's patience. Guests leaked one of her comments to someone at a lifestyle blog. Then the whispers multiplied. People who had never met me speculated online that I had suffered a breakdown. A local gossip account implied I had fled with the baby after marital strain. One anonymous source described Ethan as devastated and trying to protect everyone involved. When I read that, I threw up. It is one thing to be betrayed in private, it is another to watch powerful people narrate your pain for public consumption while calling themselves discreet. I nearly broke then. Not because I believed them, because I and another kind only betrayed wives understand. When they arrive together, they hollow you out. I would feed Leo at 3 a.m. while staring at the wall. Feeling milk leak through my shirt and tears slip down my face without drama, without even the energy to sob. Sometimes my mother would wake and find me sitting in the dark whispering, but because I meant the war, and every time she would kneel beside me and say, yes, you can. You already are. So I didn't. We met in a conference room at her office, all glass and steel and deliberate neutrality. Victor arrived in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He did not look angry. He looked offended. There is a difference. Angry men feel challenged. Offended men feel ownership has been disrupted. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and looked at Leo's photograph on Tessa's desk for exactly half a second. I'm not here to fight, he said. That would be a new experience, Tessa replied. He ignored her. Sophie, this has gone on long enough. Ethan made a mistake. Families recover from mistakes. I said nothing, he continued. Tessa leaned back, expression blank. She had set her phone face down on the table before he arrived. Victor did not know I was recording. Handled how? I asked. He slid a folder toward me. Inside was a proposed settlement, a condo in my name, a monthly support payment, a structured visitation schedule, generous language, about KO-parenting, and buried in the details, primary physical custody to Ethan, with Diane designated for substantial caregiving support. I felt cold all over. "You are my baby," I said quietly. Victor's mouth tightened. "I want stability for my grandson. You think that means taking him from his mother?" "Think children should be raised in environments that reflect their future." Tessa spoke before I could say that more clearly. Victor looked mildly annoyed. "Sophie is not equipped for the world Leo is being born into." My whole body went still. There it was, not concern, not family unity, class, blood, ownership, isc, and Ethan agrees with this. Victor's silence was answer enough. Then he made the mistake that sealed his own destruction. He said, "You are a sentimental woman." That's not an insult. Sentimental women often make poor strategic decisions. Take the apartment, take the support, be his mother without trying to be what you are not. "What am I not?" I whispered. He looked me dead in the face and answered, "One of us." I think he expected tears. Instead. Something calm and cold settled over me so completely that even my voice surprised me. "You're right," I said. "I'm not one of you." His chin lifted slightly, mistaking agreement for surrender. Then I slid the folder back across the table. "I'm better." He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. 2 weeks later, the temporary custody hearing began. I had never been in a courtroom over my own life before. It is a strange violence, sitting under high ceilings while strangers examine your marriage, like evidence from a crime scene. Ethan sat across from me in a dark suit, looking tragic in the way only wealthy men can, groomed enough to appear respectable, tired enough to appear wounded. Diane was there, in pearls. Victor in silence, my mother in a simple navy dress, gripping my hand before proceedings began. Tessa beside me, sharp as a blade. Marisol waiting to testify. Paige waiting too. I remember almost none of the opening arguments because my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What I do remember is Ethan's lawyer describing me as understandably overwhelmed, and acting from a place of trauma rather than long-term judgment, and something in me nearly laughed from disbelief. The audacity of men who injure you and then ask the court to protect them from your response is the audacity of men who injure you and then ask the court to protect them from your response is something I will never stop being stunned by. But then, Tessa stood up, and the room changed. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She simply began laying truth down piece by piece until the version of me Ethan's side had tried to construct started coming apart like wet paper. First came the hospital records, emergency surgical notes, the blood loss, the repeated attempts to reach my husband, the timestamps that showed exactly when I was being prepped for surgery, exactly when I was in the operating room, exactly when my son was born, and exactly how absent Ethan had been through all of it. Then came Marisol. She walked to the stand in plain navy scrubs beneath a cardigan, her hair pulled back, her expression steady in the way of people who have spent years watching human beings meet the worst nights of their lives. She answered every question with the calm precision of someone who knew facts did not need decoration. Yes, I had been in significant distress. Yes, I repeatedly asked for my husband. Yes, hospital staff attempted to reach him. No, he was not present when the decision for emergency surgery was made. No, he was not present when I was taken into the operating room. No, he was not present when complications arose afterward. Ethan's attorney tried to imply that many spouses miss parts of labor due to unforeseen emergencies. Marisol looked at him and said, "Many do. Most are not photographed drinking champagne at a gala while their wife is in surgery." A sound went through the courtroom then, soft but unmistakable. Not quite a gasp, more like the moment a crowd realizes the floor beneath. One side has given way. Diane went rigid. Victor stared straight ahead. Ethan's face lost color. Then Tessa called Paige. I will never forget the way Ethan looked when she took the stand. Real betrayal, the kind, powerful people feel only when someone they considered invisible steps into the light and becomes dangerous. Paige did not tremble. She did not dramatize. She explained the gala timeline, the medic evaluation, the internal communications, the false urgency fed to Ethan, and then the messages were entered into the record. I watched the judge read them. If you don't show, people will talk. She'll still be in labor. We need optics tonight. Keep this from turning into another emotional circus. Every sentence landed like a hammer. Ethan's lawyer objected to tone, context, interpretation. Tessa answered, with supporting metadata, and the kind of cold legal patience that makes bad arguments look childish. Then she introduced the draft. Postnuptial documents. I looked at Ethan when those came up. Really looked at him. For the first time he did not look like a wronged father or a pressured son. He looked cornered. Which meant he understood exactly what those documents were, exactly what they suggested, exactly how impossible it would be now to dismiss everything as misunderstanding. He had known. Maybe not every layer, maybe not every contingency his parents had imagined, but enough to say nothing, enough to benefit, enough to keep me dependent, while telling himself he was protecting the family. When it was his turn on the stand, Tessa destroyed him so gently it almost looked merciful. Did you receive a text from your mother stating your wife would still be in labor and that first babies take a long time? Yes. Did you know by then that your father had not been admitted to the hospital or pause?
Yeah.
Did you still choose to go to the gala? His jaw tightened. I chose to support my family during a yes or no, Mr. Mercer, yes. Did you tell anyone at the hospital you would be gone only 1 hour?
Yes.
Were you gone more than 1 hour?
Yes.
Did your wife undergo emergency surgery while you were attending donor-facing events for your family? He looked toward the judge, then down at his hands.
Yes.
Did you later file an emergency petition suggesting she was unstable for taking the newborn to a safe location? His attorney objected. Overruled. Ethan's answer came out like something dragged over broken glass. Yes. There are moments in a life when you can feel illusion dying in public. That was one of them. The judge did not rule immediately, but when she finally spoke, her voice carried that special kind of restraint adults use when they are furious enough to become careful. She granted me primary temporary physical custody. Ethan was awarded supervised visitation pending further evaluation, and final orders, as she warned both families against public commentary. She noted, on the record, that the court took a grave view of attempts to leverage postpartum vulnerability, manipulate narrative, or distort the circumstances surrounding childbirth for strategic advantage. I did not cry. Not then. I sat perfectly still, while Tessa squeezed my wrist under the table and my mother put her hand over her own mouth. Across the aisle, Diane looked like someone had insulted God in her dining room. Victor's expression had gone beyond anger into that gray zone where powerful men first encounter consequences and mistake them for injustice. Ethan did not look at me when the hearing ended. He looked at Leo's photograph in my file. Then he looked at the floor outside the courthouse. Tessa shielded me from reporters I hadn't even known would be there. Apparently the Mercer name had drawn attention, faster than I realized. We left through a side exit, and for the first time since the hospital, I sat in a car with my son sleeping in the back and allowed myself one full breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. But winning the first hearing was not the end. It was the beginning of the part where people who had always gotten their way became dangerous because they could feel the shape of loss. The next month was brutal. Diane violated the court's warning twice without technically violating it at all. She told friends she was devastated by how modern legal systems often misunderstand maternal fragility. She hosted a luncheon for families in crisis that somehow included 3 women known for leaking to society columns. Victor began shoring up business alliances behind the scenes, trying to keep the Mercer name stable while the legal matter moved toward final custody proceedings and parallel civil exposure. And, Ethan kept trying to reach me in ways that had nothing to do with the supervised visits. He wrote long emails at 2 in the morning. He left voicemails that began with Leo and ended with us. He said he missed his son. He said he missed me. He said he didn't know how badly he had been letting his parents run his life until it cost him everything. For a while I refused to listen to them all the way through. Then one night, when Leo was asleep against my shoulder and the apartment was dark except for the kitchen light my mother always left on, I listened to one from start to finish. His voice sounded wrecked. Sophie, I know there is no excuse. I know that, but I need you to understand that I did love you. I do love you. I kept thinking I could manage them and keep you, both of you, in my life. I kept thinking I could smooth things over later. I know how pathetic that sounds now. I just ... I never thought you'd really leave. And that last line sat with me for a long time, not because it moved me, because it told the truth. He never thought I would leave. Not after the engagement toast, not after the wedding, Not after the baby shower, not after the financial restrictions, not after the labor ward. He had built his whole identity around a certainty that I would keep surviving, whatever version of him showed up. That certainty was the real thing that died when I walked out of the hospital. A week later, Judith made her move. It was all quiet paper, quiet signatures, quiet notices served through channels men like Victor respected because they could not charm or bully them. The Vale entities initiated formal review of Mercer urban developments, depositions, occupancy structures, and disclosure obligations. Questions were raised about concealed control, improper use of residential assets, and reputational breach conditions attached to certain financing agreements. Victor called it harassment. Judith called it governance. The effect was immediate. Banks got nervous. Board members started asking questions. Planned deals slowed. One investor requested an independent review. Then came the letter regarding the house. I held it in my hand and felt the past rearrange itself. The home Ethan had used, as proof of his ability to provide, the place I had decorated room by room while his mother treated me like a tolerated guest. The nursery where I folded onesies the night my water broke. It was under trust authority linked to me and now legally available for reclaiming once the occupancy arrangement terminated. My mother read the letter twice and whispered, almost to herself, "Your grandmother knew. I think she had. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not the exact shape betrayal would take. But she had known enough about families like the Mercers to leave doors for me that I would only recognize when I needed them." When Ethan learned the truth, he came apart. Not publicly at first. Publicly, he still tried to look composed. But privately, according to Paige and then later according to Ethan himself, the revelation hit him like a moral collapse. Not because he had lost real estate, because it shattered the story. He had been living inside. He had been the provider, the rescuer, the Mercer son bringing a less powerful woman into a bigger life, to discover that the ground under his polished version of manhood had partly been mine. All along did something no accusation had managed to do. It forced him to see how much of his confidence had depended on my ignorance. He asked for a private conversation through counsel. Tessa said no twice. The third time, she agreed on the condition that it happened in her conference room and lasted no more than 20 minutes. You walked in looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 weeks. I had Leo with me, not as a shield, just because, at that stage of infancy, he was attached to me in the practical, all-consuming ways. Newborns. Ethan sat down across from us and, for a moment, just looked at his son. Leo was awake, round-cheeked, blinking at the world with that solemn baby seriousness that makes you feel watched by someone ancient. "He looks like you around the eyes," he said. I said nothing. He swallowed. "Is it true about the trust? About the house? About Mercer debt?" "Yes. You knew. I found out after I left." He laughed once, quietly, without humor. "My mother always talked about bloodlines. Legacy. What families build. She never imagined she was sneering at the woman who could wipe out half my father's leverage. There are easier lessons," I said, "but apparently not for your family." He shut his eyes briefly. "I'm not here to fight. That makes one of us late to the concept." He accepted that. Then he looked at me with a kind of honesty I had almost never seen in him when we were married. I told myself I was protecting everyone. I see now I was protecting the version of myself that only existed if my parents approved of me, and I let that matter more than you, more than him. I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain how ashamed I am. Shame is complicated. It can be sincere and still useless. I knew that by then, so I asked the only question that mattered. Your father had not started losing control of his business. If your mother had not been exposed, if the court had not ruled against you, would you be here like this? His silence answered me. I was enough. He left 10 minutes later with tears in his eyes and no access to my sympathy. The final custody hearing was set for early autumn. By then, Leo was almost 5 months old, soft and alert, and beginning to laugh in his sleep. Motherhood had settled into my bones in ways that surprised me. I was still tired, God. I was tired, but I was no longer moving through fog. I knew the sound that meant hunger and the one that meant discomfort. I knew how to settle him against my chest so his breathing slowed. I knew I could function on fractured rest and still make choices that would shape the rest of our lives. I had also begun working again. Carefully, from home and then from a temporary office. A few old clients returned, and more. The story circulating in certain social circles made some people keep their distance, but it made other people come closer. Women I barely knew started sending referrals. Quietly, deliberately. as if they understood exactly what was happening and wanted to vote with trust. By the time the final hearing came, I was no longer just surviving, I was rebuilding. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Mercer business troubles had become the kind of whispered scandal moneyed cities enjoy most. Part legal drama, part society collapse, part moral entertainment for people who privately live the same way and publicly condemn it. Reporters lined the hallway outside. The judge looked irritated before anyone even spoke. Tessa's strategy this time was different. The first hearing had been about safety. This one was about pattern. She showed the court not just the night of the gala, but the architecture around it, the financial limitation efforts during pregnancy, the drafted post-nup language, Victor's settlement proposal transferring real caregiving power to Diane, messages minimizing my distress, coordinated reputation management after childbirth, and finally, children should be raised in environments that reflect their future. We listened while he explained that I was not equipped for the world. The room was so quiet I could hear paper shifting in the back row. Diane's face had gone white. Victor looked like murder held upright by tailoring. Ethan did something then. Supplemental testimony. Tessa glanced at me. He admitted he had allowed their expectations to influence his decisions during my pregnancy. He admitted he had failed me. Failed Leo. Failed the responsibilities of husband and father. He did not ask for mercy. He asked the court not to punish his son for his weakness. I watched him speak and felt something strange. Not forgiveness, not love, recognition, for the first time in his life. Maybe he was telling the truth without hiding behind elegance. His father stared at him in disbelief. His mother looked at him like he had died. When the judge issued her ruling, it was comprehensive. I was granted primary physical custody. Ethan received a structured path to increasing parenting time contingent on continued compliance, independent counseling, and separation of grandparental interference from his parenting decisions. The court specifically restricted unsupervised access by Diane and Victor pending separate review. The judge's written remarks, later quoted in more places than the Mercers could control, noted a pattern of manipulative family conduct and praised my actions as protective, not alienating. Outside cameras waited. This time I did not run from them. I did not make a speech either. I simply stopped once, held my son closer and said, "No woman should have to prove she was worth staying with while she was giving birth. And no child should be used to continue a family's control." Then I got in the car and left. The fallout, with fast within 3 months, Victor was forced out of several public-facing roles. The board did not call it removal, of course. Men like Victor are never removed in language as honest as what happens to them. They step back, they transition, they focus on private matters, but everyone knew Diane disappeared from the luncheon circuit for a season after one particularly brutal article summarized the custody findings alongside the gala photographs. Grace and unity, it said, had looked very different in the hospital. The Mercer Foundation quietly postponed 2 major events. A planned profile on Diane's intergenerational leadership vanished from publication. One of her closest social allies stopped taking her calls after realizing private remarks. It might become public evidence. Karma rarely arrives with thunder. Usually it comes as exclusion. A silence. A stores. Used to open suddenly, staying closed. A how. The legal disentangling took time, but in the end the occupancy issue resolved exactly as Judith had predicted. Ethan moved out before the final transfer arrangements were complete. I did not ask where he went. Later I heard he had taken a smaller place across town, stripped of family grandeur, paid for with his own salary instead of inherited ease, and then, almost 9 months after I had been wheeled into surgery and abandoned under fluorescent lights, I stood in front of that house again, not as Ethan Mercer's wife, not as a tolerated outsider, as Sophie Bennett, Leo's mother, the legal authority over the property his family had used as a stage set for power. The front door opened with the same brass key. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paint. For 1 second, memory rushed me so hard I thought I might have to step back outside. I saw myself pregnant in that foyer, hand on my lower back. I saw Ethan kissing my cheek in the kitchen before work. I saw Diane standing in the living room giving opinions nobody asked for. I saw the woman I had been, trying to earn rest in a home she had actually been the one to. Sovereign. Then Leo made a little sound from his stroller and the spell broke. I walked in. That was the first time. I came home after the hospital, and even then, I did not come home to my marriage. I came home to myself. A month later, Judith delivered one last thing my grandmother had left for me, a letter. It had been sealed with instructions that had been given to me only after the birth of my first child, and only if certain trust transitions had occurred. I sat alone in the nursery, my nursery, now truly mine, while Leo slept in the crib I had once chosen under entirely different dreams. And I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Sophie, if you are reading this, then life has likely been less gentle than I wished for you. I am sorry for that, though not surprised. Some families measure women by what they tolerate. I have spent enough time around such people to know charm is often only hunger wearing polish. You were never born to be handled. If motherhood has arrived by the time this letter does, then you know now what power truly is. Not money, though that matters. Not lineage, though fools worship it. Power is the moment a woman sees clearly and refuses to abandon herself in order to stay loved. If the man beside you has proven worthy, be kind. If he has not, be exact. I have arranged what I can, not because I doubt you, but because I know how. Often the world mistakes a gentle woman for an unguarded one. You come from me as much as from anyone. Do not bow where you should stand. I cried so hard over that letter that Leo woke up and began fussing, and I laughed through tears as I lifted him from the crib and held him against me. Do not bow where you should stand. That became the sentence I built the next year around. Ethan did the counseling the court required. To his credit, he kept doing it even after he had met every official condition. He became more reliable in his visits, less defensive, more present. He learned how to change diapers without looking terrified. He learned Leo's preferences, his sleepy moods, the ridiculous little face he made right before sneezing. The first time I saw Ethan hold our son without performing fatherhood, just quietly holding him, cheek against soft baby hair, no audience, no excuses, I felt grief move through me like weather. Not because I wanted him back, because this was the man I had begged for in a labor ward, and he had arrived too late to save what mattered between us. One evening after a handoff, he stood on the front steps while Leo slept upstairs and said, "I know there's no version where you and I become what we were supposed to be." "No," I said. He nodded. "I'm starting to understand that loving someone is not the same as being brave enough for them." It was the most intelligent thing he had ever said to me. I answered honestly, "I hope for Leo's sake that you keep understanding it." He looked at the windows of the house, then back at me. "Did you ever love me less after the hospital?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I finally loved myself more." He closed his eyes briefly, like the truth hurt and helped at the same time. Then he left up by Leo's first birthday, and the story people told about me had changed. Not the people who need women to stay small in order to feel safe around them. They still called me calculating, dramatic, lucky, cold. But those weren't the voices that mattered anymore. The voices that mattered were my son's laughter echoing through a kitchen I no longer associated with. Judgment at my mother humming as she iced cupcakes. Tessa arriving with absurdly expensive toy blocks and courtroom. Gossip. Page, now working somewhere healthier, bringing a children's book and saying, "He looks like peace." Judith standing near the window with a small smile that always made me think of my grandmother's hands. Even Marisol came by for a little while after her shift, still in scrubs, kissing Leo's forehead and telling him he had made quite an entrance into the world. We kept the party small. No gala donors, no silver heirloom speeches, no speeches at all. Really, just candlelight in the dining room, yellow flowers, frosting on Leo's fingers, and people who had shown me what love looked like when it was not trying to own me. Later that night, after everyone left and the house had gone quiet, stood in the nursery doorway and watched my son sleep. 1 year. 1 year since blood and fluorescent lights and betrayal. 1 year since a nurse held my hand because my husband chose appearance over presence. 1 year since I learned that some endings do not break you. They'll reveal the shape you should have been living in all along. People still ask sometimes, usually in lowered voices sharpened by curiosity, whether I regret leaving the way I did, whether I wish I had tried harder, whether it might have been better for Leo if I had gone home and worked things out quietly. And every time I think of that hospital room, the empty chair, the society page smile, the text that said I could be handled later, then I think of the woman who walked out through a side exit with stitches in her body and her newborn against her heart, not knowing exactly where she was going, but knowing with perfect certainty where she would never return. So no, I do not regret leaving, because the truth is, I never came home after the hospital, not to the marriage, not to the illusion, not to the smaller version of myself that kept mistaking survival for love. I came back to a house, yes. I came back to rooms I had once decorated for a future that died. I came back to my work. I came back to my name. I came back to the inheritance I had never wanted to need. I came back to the kind of strength that only arrives after something sacred is betrayed, and you decide that will be the last time. But most of all, I came back to the woman my son deserved to be raised by. And if there is such a thing as justice, I think maybe it lives there. Not in watching the Mercers lose face, though they did. Not in court orders, though they mattered. Not in the irony that the woman they treated like an intruder was standing on legal ground stronger than theirs the whole time. Justice was quieter than that. It was in the first full night Leo slept with his hand curled around my finger and no dread in my chest. It was in opening my own front door without wondering who would belittle me inside. It was in earning again, choosing again, breathing again. That was in teaching my son, long before he understood words, that love does not leave you on a hospital bed and call it obligation. Love does not humiliate you and ask for patience. Love does not make you disappear to keep the peace. Love stays. Love tells the truth. Love stands up, and once you know that, really know it, there is no going back. So when people tell the story now, they usually say it like this. He chose his parents over his laboring wife. She never came home after the hospital. What they don't understand is that this is not the story of a woman being abandoned. It is the story of a woman finally seeing the fire clearly enough to stop calling it warmth and walking out with everything that truly mattered in her arms.